Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more esoterica. Today we're going to be diving back into the works of Mrs. Helena Blavatsky. This is the secret doctrine we are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It's not the format for everyone, but people seem to find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the particular things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of the secret doctrine with ancient thought in modern dress. Modern science is ancient thought distorted, and no more. We have seen, however, what intuitional scientists think and are busy about, and now the reader may be given a few more proofs of the fact that more than one FRS is unconsciously approaching the derided secret sciences. With regard to cosmogony and primeval matter, modern speculations are undeniably ancient thought, improved by contradictory theories of recent origin. But the whole foundation belongs to Grecian and Indian archaic astronomy and physics, in those days always called philosophy. In all the Aryan and Greek speculations, one meets with the conception of an all-pervading, unorganized, and homogeneous matter, or chaos, renamed by modern scientists nebula condition of the world stuff. What Anaxagoras called chaos in his Homoemeria is now called primitive fluid by Sir W. Thomson. The Hindu and Greek atomists, Canada, Leucippus, Democritus, Epicurus, Lucretius, etc., are now reflected, as in a clear mirror, in the supporters of the atomic theory of our modern days, beginning with Leibniz's monads and ending with the vortical atoms of Sir W. Thomson. Footnote: the elemental vortices inaugurated by the mind have not been improved by their modern transformation. True, the corpuscular theory of old is rejected, and the undulatory theory has taken its place, but the question is whether the latter is so firmly established as to not be liable to be dethroned as was its predecessor. I'm pretty sure that it has been dethroned. I'm not entirely sure what the undulatory theory is, and so that is why I'm pretty sure that it has been dethroned, simply because I don't think that I've ever really heard of it. So, light from its metaphysical aspect was fully treated of in Isis Unveiled, which we have done. It is part of the Esoterica playlist. Completely done Isis Unveiled. Light is the first begotten and the first emanation of the Supreme, and light is life, says the evangelist and the Kabbalist. Both are electricity, the life principle, the anima mundi, pervading the universe, the electric vivifier of all things. Light is the great protean magician, and under the divine will of the architect. Footnote 2. I have often been taken to task for using expressions in Isis denoting belief in a personal and anthropomorphic God. This is not my idea. Kabbalistically speaking, the architect is the generic name for the Sephiroth, the builders of the universe, as the universal mind represents the collectivity of the Dayan Kohanic minds. And once again, I am in a whole different place than any of that. So, right, I do believe in a God. I do believe that there is only one God, that He is the architect indeed of all of creation, and the Holy Spirit is the physical manifestation here in the only way that it is possible. Right? Every single atom in existence is part of the Holy Spirit, all at the exact same time, and that is a direct emanation of God. We are differentiated in our individuality, right? Our temples were given to us in order to navigate 5D space, but it is also part of the Holy Spirit. We are not separated from the Holy Spirit. We are simply a piece thereof. But it is not like some sky daddy sitting around waiting to judge you for your sins. I find that equally ridiculous. The divine will of the architect, or rather the architects, the builders, called one collectively because there is only one. Its multifarious, omnipotent waves gave birth to every form as well as to every living being. From its swelling electric bosom spring matter and spirit. That is true. Within its beams lie the beginnings of all physical and chemical action, and of all cosmic and spiritual phenomena. It vitalizes and disorganizes. It gives life and produces death. And from its primordial point gradually emerged into existence the myriads of worlds, visible and invisible celestial bodies. It was at the ray of this first mother, 1 and 3, that God, according to Plato, lighted the fire which we now call the sun. The sun is not on fire. Footnote. Timaeus. We have read the entirety of Timaeus. It is part of the Ancient Lore playlist. I went too far, didn't I? Yeah. Which we now call the sun, and which is not the cause of either light nor heat, but merely the focus, or as we might say, the lens, by which the rays of the primordial light become materialized, are concentrated upon our solar system, and produce all the correlations of forces. That is not so far removed from what I believe. I believe that the sun is a transfer point of energy, not the origination point of energy. Where it comes from, I don't know. It could be this spiritual sun that they keep talking about, even though I do not really believe that. I believe that it's coming from farther out in the solar system, or in the universe, not the solar system. And so that is a difference that we may not, in my lifetime, have an answer to. This is the ether, as just explained in the views of Metcalfe, repeated by Dr. Richardson, save the submission of the former to some details of the modern undulatory theory. We do not say that we deny the theory, but assert that it needs completion and rearrangement. But the occultists are by no means the only heretics in this respect, for Mr. Robert Hunt, FRS, remarks in his Researches on Light and its Chemical Relations that the undulatory theory does not account for the results of his experiments. Sir David Brewster, in his treatise on optics, showing that the colors of vegetable life arise from a specific attraction which the particles of these bodies exercise over the differently colored rays of light, and that it is by the light of this sun that the colored juices of plants are elaborated, that the colors of bodies are changed, etc., remarks that it is not easy to allow that such effects can be produced by the mere vibration of an ethereal medium. And he is forced, he says, by this class of facts to reason as if light were material. It is. Professor Josiah B. Cook of Harvard University says that he cannot agree with those who regard the wave theory of light as an established principle of science. You're going to have problems with that. Footnote 2, Modern Chemistry. We do, in fact, know that light is both a particle and a wave. It moves in a wave as a particle. And so the wave theory is going to be better than the undulatory theory just by what is revealed here. Back to the text. Herschel's doctrine that the intensity of light in effect with each undulation is inversely as the square of the distance from the luminous body, if correct, damages a good deal if it does not kill the undulatory theory. That he is right was proved repeatedly by experiments with photometers, and though it begins to be much doubted, the undulatory theory is still alive. Isis unveiled. To this remark of Sir W. Brewster, forced to reason as if light were material, there is a good deal to reply. Light, in one sense, is certainly as material as electricity itself is. And if electricity is not material, if it is only a mode of motion, how is it that it can be stored up in Fowey's accumulators? Helmholtz says that electricity must be as atomic as matter, and Mr. W. Crookes, FRS, supported the view in his address to the chemical section of the British Association, of which he was president, at Birmingham, 1886. This is what Helmholtz says in his Faraday Lectures, 1881. If we accept the hypothesis that the elementary substances are composed of atoms, we cannot avoid concluding that electricity also, positive as well as negative, is divided into definite elementary proportions, which behave like atoms of electricity. Electricity, lightning in specificity, but all electricity, is simply the change of ionic polarization, right? The source of it can be generated in a nuclear power plant, or it can be generated by a whirling gizmo that you make yourself with magnets and copper wire. The transfer of motion is what is happening with the electrons, but it is changing the electronic ionization in a pattern that is conducted through the conduit, right? Copper wire or the atmosphere, both are a conduit. When you see lightning flash, that is a buildup of static which is discharged through the conduit of the atmosphere, and in specificity, the conduit in the atmosphere most often is going to be moisture, humidity, sometimes even rain, but most often humidity. And as the lightning comes down, it is changing the molecular bonds of that water into ozone. That is not the only change that is taking place, but that is a very significant change that is taking place inside of every electrical bolt. What you see is the physical release of the heat of that ionic change happening. That is why we see lightning, and we don't necessarily see electricity unless we are conducting a spark, right? If we are making that happen, like with a spark plug, you can literally see the spark. The same thing is happening there. It is losing the ionic bond from the one thing, changing it in the course of the path to the ground. It is the same for every electrical current, right? It is a change of ionic bonds. It is literally the change in motion. And so without motion, there is no electricity, even in storing it, right? There is still resistance inside of the battery. And so without the change of state of ionics, there is no electrical current. So there are no atoms of electricity. There is electricity affecting atoms. And that is an important distinction. There is no independent, this is electricity. Electricity is the interaction created between two elements. Hopefully I explained that in a fairly understandable way. Here we have to repeat that which was already said in section 9. There is but one science that can henceforth direct modern research into the one path which will lead to the discovery of the whole. Hitherto, occult, truth, and it is the youngest of all, chemistry, as it now stands reformed. There is no other, not excluding astronomy, that can so unerringly guide scientific intuition as chemistry can. Two proofs of it are to be found in the world of science. Two great chemists, each among the greatest in his own country, and these are Mr. Crookes and the late Professor Butleroff. One, a thorough believer in abnormal phenomena, the other as fervid a spiritualist as he was great in natural sciences. It becomes evident that while pondering over the ultimate divisibility of matter and in the hitherto fruitless chase after the element of negative atomic weight, the scientifically trained mind of the chemist must feel irresistibly drawn towards these ever-shrouded worlds, to the mysterious beyond, whose measureless depths seem to close against the approach of the too materialistic hand that would fain draw aside its veil. It is the unknown and the ever unknowable, warns the monist agnostic. Not so, answers the persevering chemist. We are on the track and are not daunted, and fain would we enter the mysterious region which ignorance tickets unknown. Footnote. Mr. Crookes's presidential address at Birmingham. There is but one unknown, the ultimate substratum of spirit, space. That which is not the absolute, and the one is, in virtue of that very differentiation, however far removed from the physical senses, always accessible to the spiritual human mind, which is a coruscation of the indifferentiable integral. Practical Lessons on the Occult. A few lines at the very close of his lecture on the genesis of the elements, 2 or 3 sentences, showed the eminent scientist to be on the royal road to the greatest discoveries. He has been overshadowing for some time the original protyle, and came to the conclusion that he who grasps the key will be permitted to unlock some of the deepest mysteries of creation. The protyle, as that great chemist explains, is a word analogous to protoplasm, to express the idea of the original primal matter existing before the evolution of the chemical elements. The word I have ventured to use for this purpose is compounded of pro, earlier than, and hyle, the stuff of which things are made. The word is scarcely a new coinage, for 600 years ago Roger Bacon wrote in his Art Chimiae, "The elements are made out of hyle, and every element is converted into the nature of another element." The knowledge of Roger Bacon did not come to this wonderful old magician by inspiration. Footnote. Thus, what the writer of the present work said 10 years ago in Isis Unveiled was prophetic, it seems. These are the words. Many of these mystics, by following what they are taught by some treatises secretly preserved from one generation to another, achieved discoveries which would not be despised even in our modern days of exact sciences. Roger Bacon, the friar, was laughed at as a quack, and is now generally numbered among pretenders to magic art. But his discoveries were nevertheless accepted, and are now used by those who ridicule him the most. Roger Bacon belonged by right, if not by fact, to that brotherhood which includes all those who study the occult sciences. Living in the 13th century, almost a contemporary, therefore, of Albert Magnus and Thomas Aquinas, his discoveries, such as gunpowder and optical glasses, and his mechanical achievements, were considered by everyone as so many miracles. He was accused of having made a compact with the evil one. He did not come to this wonderful old magician by inspiration, but because he studied ancient works on magic and alchemy, having a key to the real meanings of the words. But see what Mr. Crookes says of protyle, next neighbor to the unconscious mula prakriti of the occultists. Let us start at the moment when the first element came into existence. Before this time, matter, as we know it, was not. It is equally impossible to conceive of matter without energy as of energy without matter. From one point of view, both are convertible terms. Before the birth of atoms, all those forms of energy, which become evident when matter acts upon matter, could not have existed. Footnote. Just so, these forms of energy which become evident in the laboratory of the chemist and physicist, but there are other forms of energy wedded to other forms of matter which are supersensuous, yet known to the adepts. They were locked up in the protyle as latent potentialities only. Coincident with the creation of atoms, all those attributes and properties which form the means of discriminating one chemical element from another start into existence fully endowed with energy. I agree with that. With every respect due to the great knowledge of the lecturer, the occultist would put it otherwise. You're wrong. They would think, once again, we enter into the realm of speculation. The realm of the occultist is that there is some stasis period that occurs periodically, and that may be true, but we have no reason to believe so. There is, however, reason to believe that the universe is cyclical, and that there is no end, merely a new beginning. And that can be a little bit hard to conceive, but it is taking all of the atoms that are existing right now and then immediately creating the new reality. There is no period of rest other than a nanosecond or something along those lines, maybe even a minute, but not like millions of years of absolute nothing, right? There is no reason to believe that that is a real thing. There is significant reason to believe that the universe is toroidal. It had to have come from somewhere at some point in time, that is true, but speculating upon that bears no fruit. Coming to the realization that the cyclical nature does not necessarily mean that there has to be the stasis point was an important thing for me. It doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be for you, but I disagree with it, right? I disagree with the stasis point theorem that I believe that we came from and we are going to somewheres, but that is not stasis. And it separates me greatly from Mrs. Blavatsky and those who believe along the same lines as her. But once again, I have unconventional beliefs, and you are free to not believe them. The occultists would put it otherwise. They would say that no atom is ever created, for the atoms are eternal within the bosom of the one atom, the atom of atoms, viewed during Manvantara as the Jagad Yoni, the material causative womb of the world. Pradhana, unmodified matter, that which is the first form of Prakriti, or visible material visible, as well as invisible nature, and Purusha, spirit, are eternally one. And they are Nirupati, without adventitious qualities or attributes. Only during pralaya, and when beyond any of the planes of consciousness of existence. The atom, as known to modern science, is inseparable from the Purusha, which is spirit, but is now called energy in science. The protyle atom has not been comminuted or subtilized. It has simply passed into that plane, which is no plane, but the eternal state of everything beyond the planes of illusion. Both Purusha and Pradhana are immutable and inconsumable, or aparananam and avyaya in eternity, and both during the Mayavic period may be referred to as Vyaya and Parananam, or that which can expand, pass away, and disappear, and is modifiable. In this sense, Purusha must, of course, be held distinct in our conceptions from Parabrahman. Nevertheless, that which is called energy or force in science, and has been explained as a dual force by Metcalfe, is never, in fact, and cannot be energy alone, for it is the substance of the world, its soul, the all-permeant sarvaga, in conjunction with kala, time. The three are the Trinity in one. During Manvantara, the all-potential unity, which acts on the plane of illusion, Maya, as three distinct things. In Orphic philosophy in Greece, they were called Phanes, Chaos, and Chronos, the triad of the occult philosophers of that period. But see how closely Mr. Crookes brushes by the unknowable, and what potentialities there are for the acceptance of occult truth in his discoveries. He continues, speaking of the evolution of atoms. Let us pause at the end of the first complete vibration and examine the result. We have already found the elements of water, ammonia, carbonic acid, the atmosphere, plant and animal life, phosphorus for the brain, salt for the seas, clay for the solid earth, phosphates and silicates, sufficient for a world of inhabitants not so very different from what we enjoy at the present day. True, the human inhabitants would have to live in a state of more than Arcadian simplicity, and the absence of calcic phosphate would be awkward as far as the bone is concerned. Footnote. It is just the existence of such worlds and other planes of consciousness that is claimed by the occultist. The secret science teaches that the primitive race was boneless, see Book 2, and that there are, to us, invisible worlds peopled as our own, besides the populations of the Dayan Kohans. And that is another one of those things that definitely separates me. I don't doubt that there are other planes of existence, right? And we can associate fairly freely with the first five, right? The elemental, we know about the elements. And water, by the way, is not an element in and of itself. But we know about the elements, we know about plants, we know about the simple animals, we know about the more complex animals. We know about humans and our ability to navigate 5D space. We don't know about the sixth and seventh in the same way because they are above the plane of the material. They are the disincorporated spirits and the elementals on the sixth plane of existence. That is the definition Plato and Socrates would be familiar with of elementals, a primal force of existence living on another plane, maybe in charge of something, but probably not. And then you have the seventh level, which is the level of interference, right? That is the angels, the demons, the jinn, the aliens, however you want to call those things. But we are less familiar with those two planes of existence. And so I believe that they are there, but they are here in our reality. We just can't see them any more than we can see the individualized atom without specialized equipment. If we have the correct equipment or the proper sensitization, we can see them here with us. We don't have to go to some other plane of existence in order to experience those. Both of my experiences with the other have been awake, aware, and not in a meditative state. I mean, when I had an angel come to me, I wasn't meditating, I wasn't high, I wasn't doing any of those things. It came to me here. I was able to see it here, but that was because of that will, not mine. If you are particularly sensitive, you may be able to remove whatever block it is that keeps you from seeing it here, but you don't go somewhere else and have to see it. If so, you're probably just imagining it. Back to the text. At the lower end of our curve, we see great hiatus, this oasis, and the blanks which precede and follow it may be referred with much probability to the particular way in which our Earth developed into a member of our solar system. If this be so, it may be that on our Earth only these blanks occur, and not generally throughout the universe. This justifies several assertions in the occult works, except that it's not necessarily true, right? Firstly, that neither stars nor the sun can be said to be constituted of those terrestrial elements with which the chemist is familiar, though they are all present in the sun's outward robes, and a host more of the elements so far unknown to science. Okay, that does not justify it because we, once again, have the lens of history and superior technology to fall back on. It is almost certain, right, we have not been physically to the sun to take a sample, but it is almost certain that all of the elements exist there, in the exact same way that they do here, but in a more excited state. The cause of that excitement is the point of debate, right? Whether that is an internally contained fission or fusion process, or whether it is simply an electrode and a conduit for somewhere farther out in space. That is the contention. It is not whether or not the sun exists, whether or not the terrestrial elements are present. They are present, right? Even in the outer robes, but most likely within the firm makeup of the sun itself. People like to say, well, it's a helium sun or it's a hydrogen sun. It is neither in exclusivity, right? To think that, here's one for my physics friends. How are you going to tell me that all of the helium by itself, or the hydrogen by itself, congregated in the point at which we attribute the gravity for our system, right? Now, Earth has its own gravity. We are held here by the gravity of the Earth. But the sun is much more attractive than the Earth is. And so any element that gets near to it is pulled into it. You can see this by comets. We, once again, have that lens of technology to fall back on. The GOES satellite, once again, we are going to go to the GOES. You can go and watch that every single day. And one of the things that you can watch is periodically there are intrusions into our solar system from various objects, asteroids, comets, things of that nature. If they get too close to the sun, they are pulled into the sun. That does not give you an exclusive lighter, like to assume that that is the most compacted, lightest element is a little bit wild, right? It is so much hydrogen that nothing else can escape except the fusion of hydrogen into helium. That's a problem theoretically with physics, right? And it would make more sense if this super ultra dense place was instead collecting all of the heavier elements, because those would be the ones that would most likely congregate into the center of the gravitational mass. And so there are problems both with the current theories and definitely with the ones that she had. But yes, there were a host more elements so far unknown to science, because they were still just figuring out that hydrogen and oxygen constitute water. Secondly, that our globe has its own special laboratory on the faraway outskirts of its atmosphere, crossing which every atom and molecule change and differentiate from their primordial nature. That would have to be the electromagnetic field. You're most familiar with those with the aurora borealis situation, right? You have the northern lights and the southern lights. That is the physical manifestation of our electromagnetic shield interfering with the radiation from the sun. And so, in that instance, this would be true, right? There is a special laboratory creating special circumstances by which every atom and molecule change when they come in. That is true. Whether it is explained right as a special laboratory is less true. And thirdly, that though no element present in our Earth could ever be possibly found wanting in the sun, there are many others which have either not been reached or not as yet been discovered on our globe. Some may be missing in certain stars and heavenly bodies in the process of formation, or, though present in them, these elements, on account of their present state, may not respond as yet to the usual scientific tests. Footnote 2. 5 years of Theosophy. Mr. Crookes speaks of an element still lower atomic weight than hydrogen, an element purely hypothetical as far as our Earth is concerned, though existing in abundance in the chromosphere of the sun, the helium. Well, they found it. We have it here. Occult science has that not one of the elements regarded by chemistry as such really deserve the name. This must have been before Zeppelins, huh? Well, no, they were using hydrogen. That's why it blew up. Never mind. Again, we find Mr. Crookes speaking with approbation of Dr. Carnley's weighty argument in favor of the compound nature of these so-called elements from their analogy to the compound radicals. Hitherto, alchemy alone succeeded within the historical periods and in the so-called civilized countries in obtaining a real element, or a particle of homogeneous matter, the mysterium magnum of Paracelsus. But then it was before Lord Bacon's day. Footnote. Says Mr. Crookes in the same address, the first riddle which we encounter in chemistry is, what are the elements? Of the attempts hitherto made to define or explain an element, none satisfy the demands of human intellect. The textbooks tell us that an element is a body which has not been decomposed, that it is a something to which we can add but from which we can take nothing, or a body which increases in weight with every chemical change. Such definitions are doubly unsatisfactory. They are provisional, and may cease tomorrow to be applicable in any given case. They take their stand not on any attribute of the things to be defined, but on the limitations of human power. They are confessions of intellectual impotence. Yeah, well, we fixed that problem. Back to the text. Let us now turn to the upper portion of the scheme. With hydrogen of atomic weight 1, there is little room for other elements, save perhaps for hypothetical helium. Hydrogen is atomic weight 2. Helium is high atomic weight 1. And what does atomic weight mean? Let's go ahead and hit that definition real quick. It means the count of the individualized pieces, right? So hydrogen, helium has 1 electron, 1 neutron, and 1 proton. That gives it an atomic weight of 1. Helium, or hydrogen, has an atomic weight of 2. That is 2 hydrogen, 2 electrons, 2 neutrons, and 2 protons. That is where the weight comes from. It is somewhat variable. Hydrogen, for instance, has isotopes with 1 electron and with 3 electrons. That does vary the weight a little bit, but not in a significant way to change it into a different element. Okay, I think that's good enough for that, right? But what if we get through the looking glass and cross the zero line in search of new principles? What shall we find on the other side of zero? Absolutely nothing. We have found absolutely nothing. We have plenty of theories. There are all kinds of people who will tell you that dark matter is a thing, despite the fact that there is zero evidence for it. We have not been able to prove in any way, shape, form, or fashion that dark matter actually exists, in the exact same way that we have not proved in any way, shape, form, or fashion that black holes exist. Here is ample room and verge enough for a shadow series of such unsubstantialities. Helmholtz says that electricity is probably as atomic as matter. Is electricity one of the negative elements, and the luminiferous ether another? Matter, as we know it, does not here exist. The forms of energy which are apparent in the motions of matter are, as yet, only latent possibilities. A substance of negative weight is not inconceivable. It's just something we have not been able to prove. Footnote 2. And the lecturer quotes Sir George Airy, who says, in Faraday's Life and Letters, I can easily conceive that there are plenty of bodies about us not subject to this intermutual attraction, and therefore not subject to the law of gravitation. You are wrong. But can we form a clear conception of a body which combines with other bodies in proportions expressible by negative qualities? Footnote 3. The Vedantic philosophy conceives of such, but then it is not physics, but metaphysics, called by Mr. Tyndall poetry and fiction. A genesis of the elements such as is here sketched out would not be confined to our little solar system, but would probably follow the same general sequence of events in every center of energy now visible as a star. Before the birth of atoms to gravitate towards one another, no pressure could be exercised. But at the outskirts of the fire-mist sphere, within which all is protile, at the shell in which the tremendous forces involved in the birth of a chemical element exert full sway, the fierce heat would be accompanied by gravitation sufficient to keep the newly born elements from flying off into space. As temperature increases, expansion and molecular motion increase. Molecules tend to fly asunder, and their chemical affinities become deadened. But the enormous pressure of the gravitation of the mass of atomic matter, outside what I may for brevity call the birth shell, would counteract the action of heat. Beyond the birth shell would be a space in which no chemical action could take place, owing to the temperature there being above what is called the dissociation point for compounds. In this space, the lion and the lamb would lie down together. Phosphorus and oxygen would mix without union. Hydrogen and chlorine would show no tendency to closer bonds, and even fluorine, that energetic gas which chemists have only isolated within the last month or two, would float about, free and uncombined. Outside the space of free atomic matter would be another shell, in which the formed chemical elements would have cooled down to the combination point, and the sequence of events so graphically described by Mr. Matthew Williams in The Fuel of the Sun would now take place, culminating in the solid earth and commencement of geological time. This is, in a strictly scientific but beautiful language, the description of the evolution of the differentiated universe in the secret teachings. The learned gentleman closes his address in words, every sentence of which is like a flash of light from beyond the dark veil of materiality, hitherto thrown upon the exact sciences, and a step forward towards the sanctum sanctorum of the occult. Thus, he says, we have glanced at the difficulty of defining an element. We have noticed, too, the revolt of many leading physicists and chemists against the ordinary acceptation of the term element. We have weighed the improbability of their external existence, footnote, in the form they are now, we conceive, or their origination by chance. The improbability of their external existence or their origination by chance. As a remaining alternative, we have suggested their origin by a process of evolution, like that of the heavenly bodies according to Laplace, and the plants and animals of our globe according to Lamarck, Darwin, and Wallace. Footnote 2. And to Capella and Manu, especially and originally. In the general array of the elements, as known to us, we have seen a striking approximation to that of the organic world. Footnote 3. Here is a scientific corroboration of the eternal law of correspondences and analogy. In lack of direct evidence of the decomposition of any element, we have sought and found indirect evidence. We have next glanced at the view of the genesis of the elements, and lastly, we have reviewed a scheme of their origin, suggested by Professor Reynolds' method of illustrating the periodic classification. This method, footnote 4, this method of illustrating the periodic law and the classification of elements is, in the words of Mr. Crookes, proposed by Professor Emerson Reynolds of Dublin University, who points out that in each period the general properties of the elements vary from one to another, with approximate regularity, until we reach the seventh member, which is in more or less striking contrast with the first element of the same period, as well as with the first of the next. It is important to note that they are missing helium in this, and that would make 8. Thus, chlorine, the seventh member of Mendeleev's third period, contrasts sharply with both sodium, the first member of the same series, and with potassium, the first member of the next series, whilst, on the other hand, sodium and potassium are closely analogous. The 6 elements, whose atomic weights intervene between sodium and potassium, vary in properties step by step until chlorine, the contrast to sodium, is reached. But from chlorine to potassium, the analog of sodium, there is a change in properties per saltum. If we thus recognize a contrast in properties, more or less decided, between the first and the last members of each series, we can scarcely help admitting the existence of a point of mean variation within each system. In general, the fourth element of each series possesses the property which might expect a transition element to exhibit. Thus, for the purpose of graphic translation, Professor Reynolds considers that the fourth member of a period, silicon for example, may be placed at the apex of a symmetrical curve, which shall represent, for that particular period, the direction in which the properties of the series of elements vary with rising atomic weights. Now, the writer humbly confesses complete ignorance of modern chemistry and its mysteries, but she is pretty well acquainted with the occult doctrine with regard to correspondences of types and antitypes in nature, and perfect analogy as a fundamental law in occultism. Hence, she ventures a remark which will strike every occultist, however it may be derided by orthodox science. This method of illustrating the periodic law and the behavior of elements, whether or not still a hypothesis in chemistry, is a law in occult sciences. Every well-read occultist knows that the seventh and fourth members, whether in a septenary change of worlds, the septenary hierarchy of angels, or in the constitution of man, animal, plant, or mineral atom, that the seventh and fourth members, we say, in the geometrically and mathematically uniform workings of the immutable laws of nature, always play a distinct and specific part in the septenary system. From the stars twinkling high in heaven to the sparks flying asunder from the rude fire built by the savage in his forest, from the hierarchies and the essential constitution of the dying koans, organized for diviner apprehension and a loftier range of perception than the greatest Western psychologist ever dreamed of, down to nature's classification of species among the humblest insects. Finally, from worlds to atoms, everything in the universe, from great to small, proceeds in its spiritual and physical evolution, cyclically and septennially, showing its seventh and fourth numbers, the latter the turning point, behaving in the same way as shown in the periodic law of atoms. Nature never proceeds per saltum. Therefore, when Mr. Crookes remarks to this that he does not wish to infer that the gaps in Mendeleev's table, and in this graphic representation of it, the diagram showing the evolution of atoms, necessarily mean that there are elements actually existing to fill up the gaps. These gaps may only mean that at the birth of the elements there was an easy potentiality of the formation of an element which would fit in the place. An occultist would respectfully remark to him that the latter hypothesis can only hold good if the septenary arrangement of atoms is not interfered with. This is the one law, and an infallible method that must always lead to success, one who follows it. And I am going to go ahead and disagree. If you are unaware, the fundamental number of everything is not 7, it is 8. There are many, many reasons for that, some of which she misunderstood in that very explanation. There are 7 divisions of rocks. There are 7 divisions of the makeup of the earth. There are listen to me. There are 8 divisions of classifications of rocks. There are 8 divisions of the way that the earth is congregated on the terrestrial level. There are 8 divisions of the atmosphere. There are 8 divisions of the human psyche. There are 8 divisions of pretty much everything in life. It is impossible to compute anything without base 8. It is impossible to graphically demonstrate anything without a full appreciation of the law of base 8. Base 8 is the sum creation force. And I have many reasons to say that. I will link the video, The Fundamental Harmonics of Life. You should watch that if any of that is unclear to you. There is a very good reason why I use 8 and not 7 for just about everything. If I do use 7, it is only with the caveat that 8 is included as the encompassing, right? You have 8 notes on a musical scale, but 1 and 8 are the same note, right? One is halved, one is doubled, and there is a point in the middle, the number 4, at which you will find a correlation between 1, 4. You will find a correlation between 4 and 8, and you will find a correlation between 1, 4, and 8 almost exclusively in every single instance. They are mistaking the counting process here, in my estimation, according to my speculations. Back to the text. Summing up all of the above considerations, we cannot indeed venture to assert positively that our so-called elements have been evolved from one primordial matter. But we may contend that the balance of evidence, I think, fairly weighs in favor of the speculation. Thus, inductive science, in its branches of astronomy, physics, and chemistry, while advancing timidly towards the conquest of nature's secrets and her final effects on our terrestrial plane, recedes to the days of Anaxagoras and the Chaldees in its discoveries of A. the origin of our phenomenal world, and B. the modes of formation of the bodies that compose the universe. And having to turn back for their cosmogonical hypotheses to the beliefs of the earliest philosophers and the systems of the latter, systems that were all based on the teachings of a universal secret doctrine with regard to the primeval matter with its properties, functions, and laws. Have we not the right to hope that the day is not far off when science will show a better appreciation of the wisdom of the ancients than it has hitherto done? No doubt, occult philosophy could learn a good deal from the exact modern science, but the latter, on the other hand, might profit by ancient learning in more than one way, and chiefly in cosmogony. For instance, the mystical signification, alchemical and transcendental, of the many imponderable substances that fill interplanetary space, and which, interpenetrating each, are the direct cause, at the lower end, of the production of natural phenomenon manifesting through vibration, so-called. The knowledge of the real, not the hypothetical, nature of ether, or rather of the akasa, and other mysteries, in short, can alone lead to the knowledge of forces. It is that substance against which the materialistic school of the physicists rebels with such fury, especially in France. Footnote. A group of electricians has just protested against the new theory of Clausius, the famous professor in the University of Bonn. The character of the protest is shown in the signature, which has Jules Botny in the name of the group of electriciens which had the honor of being introduced to Professor Clausius in 1881, and whose war cry, cri de ralliement, is Abasse l'éther, down with ether, even. They want universal void, you see. They're wrong. Especially in France, and which exact science has to advocate notwithstanding. They cannot make away with it without incurring the risk, like a modern Samson, of pulling down the pillars of the temple of science and getting buried under its roof. The theories built upon the rejection of force, outside and independent of matter, pure and simple, have all been shown fallacious. They do not, and cannot, cover the ground, and many of the scientific data are thus proved unscientific. Ether produced sound is said in the Puranas, and the statement is laughed at. It is the vibrations in the air, we are corrected. And what is air? Could it exist if there were no etheric medium in space to buoy up its molecules? The case stands simply thus: materialism cannot admit to existence of anything outside matter, because the acceptance of an imponderable force, the source and head of all the physical forces, other intelligent forces, would have to be admitted virtually, and that would lead science very far. For it would have to accept as a sequel the presence in man of a still more spiritual power, entirely independent, for once, of any kind of matter physicists know anything about. Hence, apart from a hypothetical ether of space and gross physical bodies, the whole sidereal and unseen space is, in the sight of the materialist, one boundless void in nature, blind, unintelligent, useless. And now, the next question is, what is the cosmic substance, and how far can one go to suspect its nature or to wrench from it its secrets, and thus feel justified in giving it a name? How far, especially, has modern science gone in the direction of those secrets, and what is it doing to solve them? The latest hobby of science, the nebular theory, may afford us some answers to this question. Let us then examine the credentials of the nebular theory, and that is going to bring us to the end of ancient thoughts in modern dress. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to some somewhat difficult topics. I understand that I have some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something I apologize for. I don't have a whole lot to add here that I haven't added already. It is important to keep speculation where speculation belongs, which is in the realm of speculation and not asserted as pure fact. We have proved some of these theories incorrect through science. Right? We have been able to isolate helium. It is indeed on the planet. We have come to the understanding of how molecular weights work and that it is a fairly good organizing system. There are divisions within that system that we do not, as of yet, have correct definitions for, but I believe we're on the edge of that. Although it appears we were on the edge of that 150 years ago, so maybe there's something else holding us back from that particular revelation. Science has a tendency to like to preserve its own beliefs and not to accept any from outside of itself. And so it is going to be hard for the restructuring of the periodic table to actually take place because there are so many people who are fundamentally just opposed to it on a very primal nature because it hurts the way that they have made their living for whatever specified period of time they have been a professional in that particular endeavor. We have to get to the point where we only accept the truth. Speculation is fine, but we can only accept as fact things that we can prove, right? That throws a lot of problems into what I do over here. Right? I believe in spirituality. I believe in magic. I believe that you can move these things, but I don't have any way to prove that to anyone as of yet. And so I am operating greatly in the realm of speculation. The things that I speculate upon, the hypotheses that I postulate, are because of experience that I have had that I cannot give you to replicate. You have to replicate them yourselves. Hopefully through the means that I have used, and hopefully I've been clear about the means that I have used. But these are good thought exercises, even if the science is definitely outdated. These are good things to think about, to wrap your mind around, even if our conception of it and their conception of it are different, and even if what they believe is provably untrue. That doesn't mean that something that we believe now will not be provably untrue in the future. And I most definitely include myself whenever I say something along those natures, right? I believe things, but I am willing to be proven wrong about the things which I believe. That is a key defining difference between me and most of humanity. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, a follow. Throw me a comment. If you agree or disagree with anything that I stated in here today, drop it in the comments, and if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If there is another work you would like to see discussed in the manner that we are doing here, drop that down below as well. And if you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks or even a membership. It will be greatly appreciated. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take. Peace.